So when I was pounding the table over the last few days telling you, hey, pay attention, this is the beginning of a new Cold War, some of you were arguing with me in the comments, and now you're seeing exactly what I said. Now, the US is on the one side with Germany and the UK and France. On the other hand, we have Russia and Iran and China basically propping the other side. So we have proxy wars going on in two locations, which is not something we're used to seeing as far as the previous time we had this Cold War scenario play out. As far as this new Cold War, we had a very alarming development yesterday. We had the Houthi rebels who are operating out of Yemen. And for those of you who haven't watched Friends, yes, this is where Chandler claimed he was moving. Shout out to people who remember that. So they actually shot a rocket or a couple of rockets out of Yemen towards Israel or towards the Navy that was parked outside of Israel. Whatever the case may be, it got shut down. But this is a whole new development where we have multiple fronts, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fronts, potentially where this whole thing is going to play out. This is going to be a lot different than the previous Cold War. It's going to be an absolute chaos. Make no mistake about it. Now, as far as the location currently on the ground in Israel and Gaza, here's what we're looking at. Should Israel decide to step into Gaza with actual infantry, this is what the potential of this may be. One outcome may be that Hezbollah decides not to intervene. And it's going to be one front for Israel in which it's going to fight Gaza or Hamas, whatever you want to call it, right? That's one scenario. Now, if Hezbollah decides to join the offensive, the minute Israel steps into Gaza, it already has a split force. They're going to spend a lot of men in Gaza fighting in urban warfare with tunnels. So if they're absolutely fragmented to the point where most of the military is currently trying to clean up the Gaza mess, should Hezbollah decide to join the offensive or dragged into the offensive, whatever may happen, it's going to open up a very complicated second front for Israel because Hezbollah is a lot worse, a lot more powerful than Hamas. Now, Hamas has about 40,000 militants, mainly light armor, mainly just AK-47s, some RPGs, some IEDs, nothing significant. Now, they do shoot rockets towards Israel, but those are pretty much homemade and they're not really that dangerous. The problem is that Hezbollah is a whole different enchilada. We're talking about 100,000 men, highly trained, well-equipped, all Iranian and Russian gear, and very motivated. According to estimates, between 130 and 200,000 rockets, and I'm talking real rockets, not the Hamas junk that they're throwing over there, real precision rockets that will take out major infrastructure in Israel, which means hospitals, airports, schools, roads, bridges, ports, you name it. It's going to be a massive hit to the infrastructure. Also, they do have ground-to-air, I think S-400s over there, which are absolutely insane. They also have lots of tunnels like the Hamas. I think the Hamas was actually indoctrinated by Hezbollah. So they're well dug in, and they also have tunnels that are offensive tunnels leading to the north of Israel, which basically will create a chaos over there. Israel currently has 30 to 50,000 men stationed across the northern border, according to the IDF information that was released. If we're talking about 100,000 versus 50,000 and they're well dug in and they're well equipped, it's going to be a big problem for Israel. Not saying they're not going to win. I'm just saying it's going to be a very tough battle. And there's not a whole lot the U.S. can do there with, a couple of carriers. They can support air power, which Israel has plenty of. But that's going to be mainly a classic battle, and we'll talk about it in a second. So you need math. You need numbers. And as far as numbers, it's a little bit of a problem for Israel. The U.S. doesn't have the manpower to land, 50,000 people and fight alongside Israel. And I don't think they want to do it at this point. Now, on the other hand, we have potentially Iran getting dragged into this. And, that's always a possibility. And if that happens, we're going to have massive rocket attacks towards Israel. Although, I would put this as less likely than not. But who knows? This is the Middle East. So they might just do that. And if that happens, the entire region is going to fall into a massive war, proxy war, Yemen, the Houthis, everything will explode like a powder keg. On top of this whole craziness that might happen from Hezbollah north, we might have Syria basically saying, hey, look, we got that Golan Heights over there, which you took from us in 1967. We're going to take it back because all of you all busy over there fighting in two fronts. We're going to go and take it. That may create a third front. The West Bank is basically waiting to explode right now. If that happens, if the Palestinian Authority loses control, loses grip, it is trying to get it under control because their worst enemy is actually not Israel, it's Hamas, and they're waiting for Hamas to basically topple. So essentially, if the PLO, currently known as the Palestinian Authority, loses the grip over the West Bank and this spills over into another front, that's going to be another front Israel has to deal with. We also have the 2 million Israeli Arabs that are living embedded in Israel. And if, even if 1% of them goes haywire and goes, extremist and goes do crazy stuff, we're talking about 20,000 people potentially running around Israel causing mayhem. So there's a lot of craziness that can happen in this region. And I'm not saying Israel isn't going to win or is going to win. I'm not a military strategist in the sense I'm going to give you an answer, but this is a clusterfuck. I'm not going to lie about it. So this is a headache. Now, I haven't mentioned Egypt and Jordan for a reason, although, again, this is the Middle East we're talking about here, so everything is possible. But Jordan and Egypt, they share a lot of interests with Israel, even though they won't admit it, even though they speak and they serve the lip service in favor of the Palestinians. The Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Israelis are allies. They have a peace treaty, and they actually share interests as far as they all are afraid from the extremist Muslims and the Palestinians and the Hamas. They all want them gone. So the potential of Jordan and Egypt actually fighting against Israel is very, very low. But again, we're talking about the Middle East here, so anything's possible, but they're probably going to stay out of this. Now, I just mentioned Yemen, a whole new location, which we haven't even brought up once in the show. Now we got rockets flying from over there. That's another potential thing you have to basically think about. Now, I mentioned in my previous video that I think President Biden went to Israel to let Netanyahu know, hey, you have to provide aid to Hamas and to Gaza. Yes, you will provide it to Gaza, and some of it will be stolen by Hamas. We know it to be fact. Hamas is not going to just sit back and let people just eat and they use the stuff they're going to get. They're going to steal some or most of it. It's just a fact. Now, he's saying this because you have to play the PR game. He's basically letting Netanyahu know, hey, you got to play the PR game. If you don't give them, food and medical supplies, the world is going to stop you, and then you won't be able to topple the Hamas government. So that's what I thought happened. And Biden literally confirmed this in an interview on Air Force One, that he literally said that to Benjamin Netanyahu, and basically he got no pushback. So that's actually happening. So I was right on that. There's a lot of chatter going on right now in Israel about what happens once this war is over, and post-war Israel probably is going to have a whole new system. We're talking about a whole new government. This government is under obviously a lot of criticism, but it's kind of underneath the surface right now because everybody's focused on the war effort. But once the war is over, all the knives will come out. It's very, very hard to see how post-war Israel keeps Netanyahu and his merry band of compadres in government. Although, again, Middle East, everything is possible. So most likely a new government after the war is over, and most likely complete the military concept overhaul. Because, look, after 1973, when Israel got surprised in the original Yom Kippur War, they've overhauled their intelligence system and became one of the best in the world at it. Somehow, over the past 15 to 20 years, they managed to screw it all up to oblivion and get embarrassed in the worst possible way. So their entire intelligence system, their military concept, everything will have to go through a massive overhaul. They'll have to basically reinvent themselves as far as intelligence, and that's not something that's easily done, but they'll have to do it just like they did it in 1973. Now, on the Saudi front, right now, Saudi is kind of a split country at this moment. We have the government, and the government is it's a one-man show, just MBS. MBS is basically leading the younger generation right now in Saudi that's basically saying, look, we're pragmatists. Israel is a very important ally for us, technology, relationship with the US, etc., etc., etc. Palestinians do nothing for me. I'm going to say the right things, but I want to work with Israel. So he's pushing for that line. The more conservative line in Saudi, and there's a lot of people who think that, are basically saying, well, no, these are our Sunni brothers, and we have to protect them, and we can't just ignore them. So Israel is playing a very delicate game. They already have an established relationship with MBS, and the deal was really close to getting done. And both sides right now, Saudis and Israel, hoping that Israel doesn't go overboard, because if they go overboard, the legitimacy of MBS actually pulling the trigger and going for a deal with Israel is going to be criticized so heavily in the Arab world that he might have a problem. So Israel needs to be very careful it doesn't do anything crazy. Now, I've seen a few videos online by so-called experts that still believe that Israel bombed that hospital, which is absolute nonsense at this point because we've seen so many evidence. But look, it's always going to be an information war and people want to push their agenda. Just what I suggest, you judge the evidence in your own eyes. Look at the videos, look at the stuff that came out, the recordings, look at the crater, look at the photos. I mean, you don't have to be a military expert to see that it wasn't Israel. But I mean, when you go to urban warfare, if they actually launch a ground offensive over there, these kind of things might happen. There's an accident, and that would be horrible for Israel, especially the Saudi angle. They can't go overboard with this. Now, The United States is basically right now playing the grown-up in the room, trying to prevent a regional war. And the main reason they're trying to prevent a regional war is actually very interesting because, look, on the one hand, we have the very natural alliance. The United States and Israel are natural partners. The United States and Saudi are natural partners. Saudi and Israel are natural partners. Remember what I said? I know it sounds weird. Saudis and the Israelis have been working for 2 decades very, very closely because they share every single interest you can think of. They're not natural enemies. It only makes sense to them to go in bed. So this whole partnership of the Gulf countries, the US and Israel makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, the alliance of the axis of evil, the new axis of evil, which is Russia, Iran, and China. Again, nothing against the people of Iran, Russia, and China. We're talking about governments here, right? So that alliance doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, those guys hate each other, and there's a lot of documentation why Russians don't like the Chinese can't stand Russians, Iranians can't stand both can't stand Iranians, but because they have this common enemy, they've all banded together. So the United States is basically saying, look, if we can keep this together and not cause a regional war that's going to bring all of them together, eventually they're going to stab each other in the back and implode from within. So let's keep it calm. You know, you do what you need to do in Gaza. Don't go overboard. Eventually, their whole alliance is going to fall apart because it doesn't make any sense economically or militarily. So don't give them an excuse to band together. That's another thing that's being played right now, again, on the bigger stage. Now, I want to explain something because people talking about these 2 carriers that are off the coast of Israel and potentially how they're going to get involved in the war with Hezbollah. Chillax. These carriers are more symbolic than anything. In fact, if you are talking about any operational aspects, maybe hostages, maybe support to getting out, U.S. citizens out of a hotspot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As far as a military perspective, look, if Hezbollah decides to open the second front against Israel, it's going to be very, very complicated. But it's going to be mostly classic warfare. It's not something that the United States can help there. They can help with air support, but Israel already has air superiority and dominance absolutely over Hezbollah. So it doesn't need that. It needs people on the ground, actual boots on the ground. And even if the US sends their 2,000 Marines that they got over there, again, the coordination is going to be a mess. And I mean, 2,000 Marines against 100,000 Hezbollah, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. It's Israel's problems to solve, and it's going to have to find a solution to this, again, which is not going to be easy. Now, going a little bit forward, let's talk about the future of Gaza, because that's one thing that doesn't get discussed a lot or at all on mainstream media. Everybody's talking about what Israel is going to do, et cetera, et cetera. What about Gaza? I mean, where's Gaza headed in the whole? We have 2 million people living over there, and I mean, a good chunk of them are just normal people who are caught, in the crossfire between the Hamas and Israel. A lot of them are Hamas supporters, by the way, but a lot of them are basically innocents. But the question is, without taking any sides, like, what happens with this place? What happens with these people? Well, let's go back and see the entire history of this place. So Gaza used to belong to Egypt. That happened from 1948 to 1967. In 1967, the Israelis captured it from Egypt when they beat Egypt, and they took that and Sinai Peninsula with it. They've managed to occupy it somehow from 1967 until the peace agreements in which they gave, in the 80s, they gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. But guess what? Egypt was like, we don't want the Gaza Strip. Now, that was a fatal mistake by the younger Israeli state. They didn't understand what they were essentially being played by the Egyptians. The Egyptians basically said, look, we want the Sinai Peninsula that you took from us. We'll take it back. But that Gaza Strip you took from us, you can keep it. So, strategic mistake. I think Israelis were thinking about all the territory and the access to the ocean and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they were not thinking about dealing with the Palestinians, which is a major, major challenge. I think the Egyptians played them. So Egyptians end up taking the Sinai Peninsula. Israel gets stuck with this, and it gets stuck with it for a long ass time. From 1967 until 2002, it was pretty much occupying it, and it was dominated by Israel, and it was not pleasant. Israeli soldiers were dying, and it was, a very painful experience for Israel. And obviously, it's a classical occupation. Now, what ended up happening is that in 2002, Israel had a prime minister by the name of Barak, not that Barak, but Ehud Barak. And Ehud Barak basically said, look, we want to make a peace deal with you Palestinians. So why don't we do that? We're going to give you 100%, the entire Gaza Strip is yours. That's going to be part of your new Palestinian state. And we're going to give you about 73% of the West Bank, which is the other half of your land. And within 10 years, you're going to go up to 92%. So basically, Ehud Barak basically said, look, 100% of Gaza and 73% of the West Bank, and within 10 years, 92% of the West Bank is yours. You can build your state there, and that's basically an 8% difference. Another 8%, and you literally have what the Palestinians had before Israel took it away in 1967. So somehow the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, basically said no to this deal, which is another historical mistake, probably even worse than the Israelis taking the Gaza Strip, and said no, and we don't want that. Why? I think the whole idea of the Palestine from the river to the sea, Palestine will always be free. So basically the Palestinians have never left that dream of kicking out the Israelis completely and basically, wiping out Israel from the map. That's the ultimate goal. And when they were offered this deal, that would basically mean that they have to give up that dream of basically destroying Israel. Now, I know it's hard for you guys to hear because we're talking about, Western morals, but this is Middle Eastern rules. So it's a whole different ball game. So Yasser Arafat says no in 2002 to getting 100% of Gaza and 93% of the West Bank. And he says no. So Israel waits another 3 years and is like, what are we going to do with this? 2005, they basically say, well, you know what? Screw it. Gaza Strip is now going full on to your own control. In 2005, Israel basically takes apart all the Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip, kicks all the Israelis out, and gives Gaza back to the Palestinians. 100% of the Gaza Strip is being ran by the Palestinians since 2005. Now, they gave it to the Palestinian Authority, and also they gave the West Bank to the Palestinian Authority minus the settlements. So it wasn't complete. But the Gaza Strip was 100%, partially the West Bank. They all went in 2005 to the full control of the Palestinian Authority in the hopes that that's going to be the first stage of them setting up their own country. Give them the land, give them self-control, give them self-administration. Eventually, it will become the new Palestine. So they withdraw from all the Israeli settlements, they withdraw from Gaza, they withdraw from the West Bank, that was basically the Palestinian Authority. And in 2006, just 1 year later, the Palestinians absolutely screw it up. They basically kick out the Palestinian Authority from Gaza. Hamas gets elected, the Palestinian Authority loses the elections, and then followed by a complete mass murder in the street in which the Hamas operatives literally killed every single PLO operative out there, and there was no more elections ever since. So since 2006, Hamas is the government in Gaza. They own the entire land. Israel has no presence inside the Gaza Strip since 2006. Now, why did Israel never took out Hamas when it could, when it was weaker and it didn't have all this crazy tunnels and the missiles and the rockets they have right now? Well, two things. Number one, and that's a stated goal, was to keep the Palestinians weaker, because the idea was, look, if we keep Hamas as a counterforce to the PLO, kind of a divide and conquer. They'll never rise up if they have, two powers fighting for power. That was one strategic mistake, because Hamas beat out the Palestinian Authority to absolute oblivion. The second and more important assumption was, look, we can Hezbollah Hamas. And what does it mean? Because it sounds strange. What do you mean Hezbollah Hamas? Well, if you notice, Hezbollah has massive military power and it can inflict a lot of damage on Israel, but they stay put. Why? Because Hezbollah transformed from a Shiite extremist terror organization into a government, into administration. Essentially what happened is Hezbollah took over the responsibility of running Lebanon. So they have a lot of responsibilities. So a lot of people depend on them for food, for energy, for everyday existence. So Hezbollah is now essentially have to feed all these people and keep the lights on. And they have a lot of responsibilities, not just, waging endless war in Israel. And when that happens, you basically keep to your own stuff and, you keep the priorities of feeding the people and keeping the lights on, and you don't go to war unless you absolutely have to. That's why Hezbollah, even though they can inflict a lot of damage on Israel, they're basically staying on the sideline right now. So they've transformed into a kind of a hybrid between a terrorist organization and a proper government. Now, the Israelis were hoping Hamas is going to do the same thing. And they was like, okay, it's 2006, within 10 years, they're going to be like the Hezbollah. They're going to modernize and they're going to take over they're going to become the new police, the new school system, they're going to build a power plant, a water distillation, treatment plants, whatever, and all that stuff administratively. And then they won't want to fight us because they'll have a country to run, which is a headache in itself, right? Wrong. Hamas was like, fuck that. We're not doing jack shit for these people. The only goal we have is to destroy you motherfuckers, you being Israel. So that failed completely, and somehow, for 16 years, 17 years, Israel failed to understand that Hamas has no intentions of becoming an administrator of Gaza. Their only decision is to destroy Israel. But in 2023, even though Israel was living in this la-la land where they get to administratize and civilianize Hamas, the masks came off, and Hamas basically showed them what their true colors is. They went into Israel on October 7th and slaughtered 1,300 civilians in their homes on Saturday morning. So now Israel is facing this very interesting choice where they're like, okay, so we tried occupying Gaza, 1967 to 2005. That didn't work. We tried giving it to the PLO. They got kicked out. That didn't work. We tried letting Hamas administrate this for 16, 17 years. They built up a hornet's nest over there, which is now a problem we have to deal with, and it's going to cost us lots of lives, so we can't do that. So we can't leave Hamas. We can't give it to the PLO. We can't occupy it. So what are we doing with this? And that's the new Hamas-less Gaza that we're going to see after this thing is over. So again, I'm just assuming here, I'm just kind of spitballing here. So Israel understands that peace with Gaza is not relevant. I mean, after what happened, there's no peace. I mean, they obviously are not interested in peace. They're interested. It's a zero-sum game for Hamas. They want the whole Israel or nothing. So they're not going to compromise. So what Israel's going to do, again, should Israel beat Hamas? Because look, there's also a scenario where Israel goes in on a ground operation in Gaza, and it's not able to rule out Hamas. It goes in, it tries, it fails, it leaves. If that happens, we're going back to where we are right now, which is basically a bloody conflict ongoing between Israel and Gaza, never-ending violence. Let's keep on going from both sides. So that's option number one. Should Israel root out Hamas and take over and win, if that happens, they'll have to reestablish what they usually do in these sort of areas, which is a buffer zone. Now, Israel already had that buffer zone because they had something that's called the Philadelphia route. Now, the Philadelphia route was this little 14-kilometer piece of land between Gaza and the Egyptian border that was there for the Israelis to prevent smuggling going on from Egypt towards Hamas. How do you think Hamas armed themselves? I mean, they don't got an airport. They don't got a seaport, and Israel is closing the border from their end. How did Hamas get all these weapons, all these anti-tanks, the IEDs, and all that stuff? How did they get it? Well, they smuggled it from Egypt, partially above ground, partially below ground, because what happened is that Israel, basically in 2005, when they left Gaza, they basically said, we're closing down Philadelphia out, so we're not going to be closing off the Egyptian border as well. We're going to let the Egyptians cover their own border. And what ended up happening is that Hamas was just paying off the Egyptian guards and smuggling all this stuff in. So Israel is going to have to reestablish a buffer zone between Gaza and Egypt to close off that border, which is going to shrink the Gaza Strip by another 10 to 15 kilometers, which is, again, it is what it is. They'll have to do it. It's kind of a necessity. So that means no more supplies, no more smuggling from Egypt. Now, again, that will stop the arms smuggling, right? We're not going to have weapons being smuggled, but it will also stop a lot of legitimate smuggles. A lot of legitimate smuggles, which is food and medicine and stuff that people every day use that go through these tunnels between Egypt and Gaza. Now, that's also going to stop. So that's not a good thing for Gaza. While the Israelis will do it to stop the arms coming in, they'll also stop all this normal stuff, the diapers and the food. And Egypt will not be able to help them here because Egypt will not let them step one foot on Sinai. So the entire existence of Gaza, should they eliminate Hamas and close off the Egyptian border, will be dependent on supplies from Israel. And that supply is not going to be rich. We know exactly how Israel handles Gaza, and they're not going to give them jacuzzis and Mercedeses. There's going to be basics, and it's not going to be pretty over there in the Gaza Strip. Now, look, the question may be here, like, look, Tom, why would they close off Gaza? Why would they not let them free access? Why not give them an airport and a seaport and open up their borders so they can trade with other countries and then they can prosper? Well, both sides have a different answer about this. And I'll present both cases here. The Israelis are saying, look, we can do that, but if they do that, what they're going to do is they're going to use this port and the seaport and all these open routes for trading that we're going to open up for them. They're going to use it to bring in arms and missiles and rockets, and they're going to try to destroy us, exactly like they've done in the past 16 years. On the other hand, the Palestinians are going to say, well, look, we've been doing this because they've been oppressing us. And because they've been oppressing us, that's how we lash out. If you let us be and you open up everything and you let us trade with the rest of the world, we're going to develop a normal country. So let us be. And the Israelis are going to say, well, no, we're not going to do that because you've proven to us that when you got that chance in 2005, you turned this into a terrorist hornet's nest. So we're not going to do that. So this is going to go back and forth. But if Israel roots out Hamas, they're going to call the shots and they're going to make life there very, very hard. Now, as far as the future of Iran, look, Iran isn't going anywhere. A lot of people are talking about, oh, Iran is going to get destroyed. They're not going anywhere. They're going to survive this. Iran is like a cockroach that's going to survive the nuclear holocaust. They're not going anywhere. So everybody knows Iran did this to an extent. They either knew about this or planned this or whatever. They have heavy involvement in this, but they're not going anywhere. Now, if Hamas survives somehow this whole Israel adventure, then Iran is going to keep using it as a proxy by smugglers, etc. Basically, the way it happened so far, which is going to pose major security threats to Israel. If Hamas basically goes away, Iran will have to find a new proxy. Either, they're going to use Hezbollah to try and get at Israel a little bit, but that's a very dangerous thing because, Hezbollah has a whole country to run, which is falling apart economically, and every little mistake when you do these little skirmishes can lead to a whole war. Another thing is, look, Hezbollah is there as a kind of a balance of terror for Tehran and Iranians. They're basically saying, look, Hezbollah is on the border. Israel knows that it will inflict massive damage to Israel if they go in. So if Israel ever to attack Iran, they have the Hezbollah as kind of the counterpower. So Israel is basically never going to attack Iran if they know Hezbollah is going to retaliate in massive amounts of power. So it kind of keeps everybody at check. If they use up Hezbollah as kind of an offensive force to keep jabbing at Israel when Hamas is gone, if it's gone, they might ignite the whole region and lose that leverage, which is not a good thing for them. So, complicated situation. Now, I think what Hamas was trying to achieve here, and it almost kind of they kind of overdid it in the way I think their original plan was to cause a lot of mayhem, cause a lot of destruction, kill a lot of civilians, and basically demoralize Israel and cause Israel to basically fall into despair. What ended up happening with Hamas is like, look, they've done such atrocities. We have not even seen these things from ISIS. We haven't seen these things from the Nazis. This is probably the most ruthless, maniacal, horrific things we've seen human beings do to each other. And they did it on video, and they were laughing, and they were live streaming the whole thing. So the entire world saw this atrocity going on. So what Hamas was trying to do here is basically drag and lure Israel into a war that's going to cause a lot of Palestinian death. It's going to cause the entire global community to delegitimize Israel and basically bring down Israel. That was the ultimate goal. Look, Hamas still exists, but their legitimacy as an organization is gone. Even the people who support Palestinian rights are all saying we condemn Hamas. Nobody is supporting Hamas. We've seen reporters talk about it. So even the Palestinian supporters, basically, Hamas is a dead brand. So Hamas is an organization that's pretty much done. But again, this didn't start yesterday. This started a long time ago. How long ago? Thousands of years. Now, I've actually made a video talking about the origins of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts going back 3,000 years in the past. It's completely objective. It's agenda-free. It's propaganda-free. I'm going to put it on the screen right now. If you want to understand the entire Israeli-Palestinian origin story, within 7 minutes with no agendas, go check out this video right now. I'll see you in the next video.